It'll take me just a second to grab that link and share it, and then we'll start right up.
All right. You going out to Twitter on that?
I shall.
Okay. I'll look for it.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, everybody.
Talking weather data. And I will tag you. Shea. All right. Hello, everyone. We'll start here in just a moment. All right. Nice. So we'll get started here in just about 60 seconds, everyone. Thanks for joining in. The audio is going to be a little bit different today. We're talking with Shea, my guest, using Skype. And apparently I can't get Skype to put the audio through Apple TV. And so I'm going to have to do some finagling and get the iPad closer to the iPhone that's streaming to YouTube so you can hear Shea. It'll work. That I have confidence in. But it's just going to be a little different today. And we are all adjusting to this whole new thing anyway. What?
Go ahead and share my screen. I don't know if that comes up, but you let me know if you can see just a little bio from us at WeatherFlow for each one of us.
Yep, there it is. Nice. I tried the Zoom today with the folks from National Tropical Weather Conference, and first time I'd ever used Zoom, and that worked out pretty well. The audio kicked out for about 5 minutes, which is like an eternity. I didn't realize that until later, but otherwise it worked pretty well. The screen sharing and all the stuff you can do. I might have to look into Zoom as maybe something included with one of the tiers on my Patreon. You know, if we can get whatever the Zoom level is where you can have 100 people, that'd be pretty neat to have like a private conference with your crowdfunding people. You know, that'd be a neat little perk. So I'm going to look into that. What do y'all think? All right, so we'll give it 2 more minutes, then we'll start at the 10-minute mark, and we'll have 50 minutes with Shea. Hello, everybody. 46 people joining in. My virtual room of 46 people. Good afternoon to you. We'll start here in just a moment. You know what I should do, Shea, is find, surely I can get me like a lightning cable or even a Bluetooth or whatever speaker for iPad, so that if this comes up again and someone's using Skype, I can just pump the audio through the speaker and just put the speaker next to my iPhone.
That's a really good idea. So I've moved my snowball microphone as close to me as I can get without leaning out of the camera to it.
Right.
And I do have a USB headset that does come through rather clear, but that's kind of finicky with some of these programs. I've
Sure.
found that even with the bandwidth being stretched for a lot of these programs like Zoom and Skype, it's kind of dicey to start fiddling with software or hardware in the middle of a meeting. So.
Right. Hey, Michael Hurd, I know you're on there as our moderator. How's the audio from Shea as we do all of our pre-show navigation of technical issues? How's the audio? Can you hear Mr. Gibson okay? As he was chatting with me there. Hey, Michael. What do you think, Mike? Is it good? The YouTube chat. Thumbs up, video. Yep, video's good. Audio's, yeah, it's not too bad. It'll work. All right, well, we'll get started here. Let me get my introduction and whatever, and then we're going to make it work. I'm all about making stuff work. All right. I got to remember that the camera, the thing's over here today. Sometimes it's over there. Here we go. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack.com, and welcome to another live broadcast of Hurricane U, the series that is made possible by our crowdfunding group, our patrons on Patreon, our HurricaneTrack insiders. It's a way for us to get information from the experts that are out there in different various fields related to hurricanes and weather in general. As we approach hurricane season, it's very important to expand our minds, expand our knowledge base on all kinds of different aspects. This will be the next to last live broadcast. I'll probably do one or two over the summer, but for now, we have this week, today, that we're going to be doing here, May 13th, and then I'll have one next week where we will speak to a gentleman who's in emergency management. Then we're going to take a pause. I have some traveling I need to do and some other things, getting some testing done for hurricane season. And then, like I said, sometime over the summer, we'll do 3 or 4 more at different random times, and we will continue to build this library of educational material for you. So again, thanks to our patrons for making this available and free to the public. All right, I'm going to bring in my guest for today. There he is, and look, if we match it up right, we're almost the same size here. So it's like he's in the room with me, so that works real well. This is Shea Gibson. He is with the company WeatherFlow. He is down in Charleston, South Carolina. I am in Wilmington, North Carolina, actually broadcasting from my daughter's bedroom. She's the one that has the big giant TV and the Apple, what do you call it? The Apple TV. And so I take over my daughter's bedroom and do the broadcast from there. We're all working at home. I worked from home since day one, so it's nothing new to me, but this is all new to me. And it's great to be able to bring someone like Shea. I have followed reports. If you probably have done the same, you're wondering, well, what is that weather flow I keep reading about in tropical cyclone reports? At the end of the season, they do these reports. You see weather flow listed in there. They may be mentioned in an intermediate advisory under the recent observations. A weather flow station recorded X mile per hour winds in certain locations, whatever. Well, Shea is going to explain it all to us. So Shea Gibson, welcome. What I'm going to do is hold the audio source up so that we can hear him. Good afternoon, Mr. Gibson. Thanks for joining us. How's it going in Charleston?
Mark, thank you very much for having me on the show today. I really appreciate it. I've followed you too, as a matter of fact. In fact, a lot of folks I know follow you for all the great work that you do with hurricanes and landfalls and recording key information for a lot of folks out there. So thank you for the information you give as well. My name is Shea Gibson. I work with WeatherFlow Inc., which is a private weather company. We specialize in wind forecasting and also modeling. I'll go ahead and share my screen just so you can see the bio. Tell me when you can see it, Mark, and just give a brief rundown about myself with the company.
There it is.
Okay, so I joined technically in 2012, was scouted and leading the Southeast region for wind forecasting, and the regions expanded from the Tidewater or the Delmarva area down into the Southeast. So I took on the region from there all the way down to Jekyll Island, Georgia, and we started doing spot forecast for winds. Now, that includes all the boaters, kiteboarders, sailors, anybody that goes on the water, including ship captains, anybody that wants to view these, and they're available in various applications that we have, like Wind Alert. You've probably heard of SailFlow. You've also probably heard of Fish Weather, iKitesurf, and iWindsurf. So those are the 5 consumer apps that we pretty much give our wind forecast through. But the company has invested nearly 500 weather stations around the coast of the United States.
Wow.
And so I help lead some of those efforts for some of those weather stations in some of these areas. So there's a lot of permissions, right? We try to get them along the coastline. So you can only imagine that there's a lot of red tape to cross, or some things that we have to do in order to get these stations placed. So we have a lot of really good partnerships with a lot of government entities and municipalities in order to get these weather stations placed. And the other things that I join in with our meteorology team, and we do blogs. So we do lots of articles. We do real-time watching of any major events, significant severe weather events, tornado outbreaks. We're on top of that as well, and we really specialize in hurricane or tropical storm landfalls. So I'll go ahead and stop share screen on that and see if I can figure that out. There we go. And I'll hand the ball back to you, Mark, for whatever questions you may have. I think I covered that all right with our Mesonet, is what it's called when you have an internet of weather stations. So we have also those applications present all of these weather stations.
Right. So let me ask you all that are watching, the audio, I cannot get it to go through. Some people are like, I hear him perfectly. Others are like, oh, not so well. Anyway, so we have the range of perfect to hardly at all. How about that, Shea? Anomalies. All right.
Yeah, I'll try to talk louder. I'll do the best I can.
Yeah, we'll do what do they call it? Like the cell phone shout, where you talk too loud and you don't even realize it. We'll just do it on purpose. All right. So what I'll do is I'll just go back and forth because you all can hear me very well, and then I'll hold up the thing and we'll get this done. So today's topic is data collection. I probably should have said that. I got too excited about having this guy on, and I just kind of overlooked that. Data collection in the field, for all of you watching here, this is the purpose of today's discussion, that there's not that much data in the field when a hurricane hits that's really reliable. We have home weather stations of various qualities. You have National Weather Service offices, or what we call WFOs, the weather forecast offices. There are a few better private weather stations, home weather stations that are put up. And then there are companies like WeatherFlow that have a standard set of instrumentation to measure all kinds of things. I'm most interested in, when it comes to hurricanes, of course, is wind speed and barometric pressure. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And to put this into context, so my group and I, over the years, have had either vehicle-mounted anemometers and pressure sensors that we bring into a hurricane. You think about Hurricane Charlie that we went through with that Chevy Tahoe. We would go out, park the vehicle, the hurricane would run over us. We'd have the anemometer, we'd even have a mast so we could get it up to maybe 4 meters above the ground, try to get the most accurate wind data we could using the vehicle. Well, these days, we don't need to do that anymore. We have remotely operated weather stations, almost like a miniature version of a Mesonet, a small network of weather stations, and we can take these and put them out there. We're not the only people that do that. Texas Tech, Texas A&M, parts of the University of Florida program, Clemson, other storm chasers, just to use that term loosely, other vehicle-mounted anemometers from storm chasers, media chasers, and then there is WeatherFlow. And like Shea mentioned, they have at least 500 of these weather stations. So what we're going to talk about is the importance of ground-based data when hurricanes make landfall, how WeatherFlow collects that data, the types of instruments they use, and why it's important in the end, where it's used. We see it like in the tropical cyclone reports and so forth. And I find it to be very fascinating. So that is the core of today's topic. So let's just start at the very beginning. I use R.M. Young propeller-based, actually they're called impellers, but it looks like a torpedo. It's a mechanical wind sensor. It records the wind speed. Well, it actually measures it through electric impulses, and whatever the science behind it's totally different subject, but we're able to translate that into, in our case, miles per hour. That's what we use. 25 miles per hour, 125 miles per hour, whatever the case may be. And we measure barometric pressure using an R.M. Young sensor, and we do that in millibars, okay? So WeatherFlow uses, and I'll hold this up so we can hear you good, hear you well. What does WeatherFlow use, and where do you site these? And talk a little bit about siting, and that's the setting up of the equipment, and how that's important to those observations.
That's a really good question, Mark. We use very similar equipment. We use the RM Young as well. We used to use standard tri-cup anemometers, and we switched over to the RM Youngs because they're all one unit. There's no longer two pieces with a vane and an anemometer.
Right.
Now everything's sort of tied together. We have standalone stations that draw solar power, so we have a solar panel attached. They always face south because that's where the most of the sunlight you're going to get in this part of the hemisphere is going to give you the most charge for the battery. So these batteries last quite a while. And what it does is it just charges the battery. This thing just reports out every 5 minutes. There are some stations that have a higher resolution capability when activated, but for the most part, all of our stations record an output every 5 minutes versus some of the other ones out there that are 15, maybe 30 minutes or an hour. So you're getting near real-time information here. We get averages, lulls, and gusts. These stations also record barometric pressure, and they also record air temperature. So we're getting 3 different readings. And when you get into hygrometers and those other things, those become a real maintenance kind of a nightmare of sorts, because it's just the maintenance on those pieces of equipment. But we're also starting to do a few things with water level as well, since the call for flooding along the eastern seaboard and sea level rise. So we're starting to sort of experiment with that and see where the needs are for it. And this information is shared with the National Weather Service offices, with our partners at NOAA, the NHC. They have access to this real-time data, and they use it for their LSRs, or their local storm reports, as well as their intermediate advisories with the Hurricane Center. That's where you'll see our stations, because we have so many of them. Our sighting, we really try to find anywhere over the water where you're going to get a cleaner fetch of wind.
Exactly.
And an optimal 10-meter, right? So an optimal 10-meter reading is what is considered something that would be considered the part of the verification process through the Weather Service. Now, they will look at all of them, but when you have, say you have a weather station that's 76 feet high versus one that's 26, you're probably going to go with the 26 for the surface observation, just because there's a little bit of bias to that higher speed aloft industry.
So with these weather stations, you said you have around 500 of them. Which states, and I don't necessarily require that you name all the states that they're in, but are they the Southeast? Do you have them from California up to Maine? Give me an idea of the geographic distribution of these weather stations, and are they a majority, or pretty much unanimously all in coastal areas, like right at the beach, so to speak?
Sure. So I'll go ahead and share screen again, and just to give you an idea, let me know when you see it.
Bingo.
Okay. So we have stations in Hawaii, and anything in yellow here is one of ours. And so we have HurNet stations in various areas, which are a pole that is basically, and I'll flash this up. What you see here is one of our premium weather stations, which is a HurNet. Now, this is actually a pole put into the ground. It's an optimal 10-meter reading. It's solid. It's going to withstand winds of 150 miles an hour.
Yeah. And
so we really try to get those in various locations around the United States, especially where we have landfalls.
Right.
So we have as far-reaching as Hawaii. When we zoom out, we have portions of the U.S. territories and even portions of Canada. And so when you zoom in, you start seeing more and more of these stations populating. So all the yellows and greens are ours in this particular map right here. So you can see how many we have in the New York area, all the way down New Jersey, the Mid-Atlantic, the Southeast, and then we get down to Florida. I mean, these things are just peppered all throughout, and a lot of these take place either through a mesonet program, or maybe the local population wants a weather station in that area. So we work with the locals as well to get more data, and we work with the Weather Service offices too to say, hey, we want this to be for everybody. And, we have some new ones going up in the Keys right now. So we're trying to get these areas saturated with data to report out. And the National Hurricane Center and the Weather Service offices absolutely love it. I think the Weather Service office actually has a monitor dedicated with this particular product that we use called Datascope. And so it's a sort of a universal product that we use to, even in our forecasting. And it does precipitate out. It's the same data is available in all of our other consumer apps as well. You can see if you click on just one of these stations, you'll get the reading, you'll get a little bit of metadata there, just in this alone, but not in the consumer apps. But you can see the winds that come up with the averages, lulls, and gusts, and what it looks like on a graph. Now, also available are all the different models for the forecasting efforts that are available. And so this is really valuable information that you get. And as you start clicking more and more into these apps, you find more data is available. But there's archiving, so we keep this data back. As long as the weather station has been around, we keep the data, and you can access that in archive. So you can go back to, say, if the weather station was installed in 2010, you can go back and look at the data from way back when to see what the winds were that day. And also, wind roses are available to show the averages in a graphical form.
That's fascinating. And so how are they powered? I'm assuming you have battery backup, and, when you anticipate a tropical cyclone event, how long, and if you can speak to this, how long can they stay running if there's a hardline power source that normally powers them? We bring our own batteries for our stuff, and they'll run for 3 or 4 days. So what's your power supply like? Because, you got to keep them up if you want it to be live. I think that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, power supply, these batteries, I believe it can go for about 5 to 7 days without recharge, right? So, but over time, those batteries do degrade.
Yeah.
And they do, they do have a shelf life.
Sure.
But they do, when they're brand new, they'll go for a good year or two with a pretty good long life, and then you'll start seeing the power cycle. If you start to see it fail at nighttime, they know it needs a new battery. But
Gotcha.
it'll hold a charge for a pretty long time. I mean, if you're talking a 2-day cloud event or 3-day cloud event, it'll survive through that, because even a little bit of sunlight still gets through that solar panel. But they're pretty self-sufficient.
Do you go change the batteries and all that on them? Are you one of the field maintenance guys, or is that somebody else's department?
I do that sometimes, not all the time. I mean, I've been known to go out in the field and do a little bit of work here and there if it's minor or cosmetic surgery, so to speak.
Right.
But it really is dependent on what is going on with the system. Like if it needs a new communications tray or something like that, it might be something for the install crew, the engineers to handle. But I've been known to dabble in a little bit with some pretty good instructions. Here's one of those wind roses I was talking about. So for this area of the Outer Banks, you see dominant winds for a particular month. And so this is from 2004 to 2020. All of this data has been compiled. So you have average gusts, daylight, 24-hour periods. And this is how we distribute our data for everyone involved. This is really good information for a lot of folks to gauge their forecasting, or just get a gist of the area in general. Like, what are the dominant winds? If you're, say, a sailor, it would be very helpful. Or even kiteboarding, for instance, that would be another application that you would say, hey, I'm going to plan a vacation there because during this month of May, we know it's going to be pretty windy there for a pretty good amount of days. But then equally, it helps with weather service offices and those in forecasting to understand what the dominant wind patterns are for that area during the course of a month or through the year.
So when a hurricane is approaching, we know that the arrival of tropical storm force winds is important as a benchmark for emergency management and other EMS, etc. So kind of explain that, why that's important. I mean, how to speak to that, and then how WeatherFlow instruments can help. You talked about that they may even have the portal open there, dedicated at a local WFO office. That's a huge advantage, just like the front line of defense. And you're talking many, many data sensors. We have 2, and I'm real proud of that. It's like, this tiny little organization of ours, we got 2 of them, but you guys have so many dozens of them in a particular area where there's a hurricane coming. You're literally that, first line of defense. I think that's incredible. So talk about that a little bit, and how sort of that first alert, if you will, it's an early warning signal, isn't it? That, the wind field is getting closer, and being able to monitor that in real time is critical.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So we all know when tropical storms are heading towards land, or there's any sort of tropical threat to land, that hurricane recon is going out, and they're dropping sondes down into the water. They're dropping sondes, or they're getting readings from the plane itself. They're getting soundings, all kinds of information from it. Our data supplements what they're seeing at the surface level. So what's coming in right off the ocean, we know that buoys can be they can be a little bit skewed or biased in the readings because they bob up and down in between waves, and they don't really capture the correct wind field because they're going down in between. They're getting shadowed out a little bit.
Sure.
You get the general gist of the flow on the gust line, but our stations are fixed, so they're getting information right off the water, and so it's supplementing what the Hurricane Recon, what their efforts are doing as well. And so a lot of times we've been able to actually say, hey, in this area, we're already at sustained tropical storm force winds.
Exactly.
And the NHC is seeing that, right? They see that. They report through their stations. From time to time, I'm known to tweet out and tag them on Twitter, but they're already on top of it. I just do that for everybody to see, hey, look, we're already seeing sustained winds. And so they're able to put that out there. Hey, look, the tropical storm warning is now in effect further up the coast, right? Because they know that eventually that the warnings will come to a certain area. As they arrive, when the wind speeds hit that threshold, the warnings come out and start spreading in the direction that the storm is heading. When you get to hurricane force, that's another thing as well.
Exactly.
We can see the winds rising in the graph. We can see how the progression of the surface observations are doing. And also, keeping real strict with the bias and eliminating the, getting the QC out on the stations that are the better quality at the 10-meter mark or as close to it as possible.
So
we do our best. We put a mast up there, right? We try to get it at 30, right at 30 feet or 32 feet, but sometimes it's just, we have to deal with what we have in the area.
Right. That's why we, I guess, kind of serendipitously stumbled upon the idea of using bridges and overpasses in these coastal areas because, my goodness, there's plenty of them. And we just mount the stuff on those, because most of those are going to be pretty close to 25, 30 feet above the water level in many instances, and sometimes 80 feet. I think about the South Causeway Bridge there in New Smyrna Beach that we've used twice. Matthew was the first, and then Dorian last year. Sighting is very, very important. Now, the general public doesn't really, I think, understand what it means when the advisory says that hurricane so-and-so has winds of 100 miles per hour. You and I understand how that works, what that really means, that it's not 100 miles per hour everywhere in that hurricane. That it's measured in a specific spot. It's very dynamic, convection rises and falls, etc. But the overall perception, I think, by the public is that when you hear of a 100 mile per hour hurricane, you're expecting 100 mile per hour wind, and pretty much everyone, for the lack of a better way to put this, is going to get your hopes dashed if you're thinking you're going to see 100 mile per hour wind. Talk about that a little bit and how your instruments can kind of help verify that wind field. And I know you've got a lot of experience with this, and so, just understanding the wind field of a tropical cyclone in general.
No, you're absolutely right. So wind disbursement is never going to be the same or equal all the way around all four quadrants of any one storm. I mean, sometimes you get a really strong category 4 or 5 where that wind distribution around the core, around the eye wall or secondary eye wall, is pretty solid.
Right.
And so we can catch that. In fact, I'll share a screen with Michael as it came ashore when we got one of the readings there. And let's see.
Oh, Michael.
Yep. And I think you were there. In fact, we had a weather station from University of South Florida that was installed. They dropped it down there just a few hours before the eye wall hit to capture some of the wind speeds, and it fell over. In fact, the zero in this picture, the zero is that station because it got ripped apart and thrown 50 feet. That was about a 3,000-pound bottom-heavy tower that was set up on the side of a highway. I remember I talked to you about that, but you can see how the wind field is. Now, distribution here is up to 123 miles an hour in gusts, whereas over here on the northwest quadrant, it's a little bit less. So these convective bands that come ashore, we're able to kind of capture some of these bands and these squall lines to verify some of the readings. And you're absolutely right about hurricane being 100 miles an hour. Well, that's the potential for it to be 100 miles an hour more so than it is the actual saying it's going to be 100 everywhere.
Right.
It really is. It's a distributed wind pattern that the NHC says, look, this is the damaging wind potential in this system right now. We're calling it 100 because that is the that is the mark that we're taking it
Yeah.
for
It was
the safety
observed.
of everyone involved, right? It's going to, in these areas impacted. So as you get further away from the eye wall, you can still have some pretty gusty winds at that top over 100 miles an hour, but they're going to be pretty short-lived in those squall bands. And the squall bands
Right.
can be very persistent. So winds in tropical system are always up and down until maybe if you have a solid eye wall like
Right.
Michael, you'll see something really, really heavy, some real violent winds. But outside of that, it just kind of comes and goes in waves, real strong surges, and it's very inconsistent.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you have something, a hurricane that is expanding in its size, maybe it's kind of unwinding, as we say. It's maybe very intense coming out of the deep tropics, and we see those moving up the east coast of the United States. We oftentimes see that get mentioned in the forecast discussion from the National Hurricane Center that, even though Hurricane so-and-so is weakening, the wind field is expanding. And so when you see something like that, what gets triggered in your mind related to, how much instrumentation is? If it's a big enough hurricane, the WeatherFlow network could receive a pretty big impact over a pretty large area.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, sometimes that does happen when we see a hurricane weaken and the wind field expand. We've seen that with even subtropical systems
Right.
that have come near the shoreline with the wind fields. The gradients expand into high pressure that's off to the northwest or the inland United States, or depending on where you are in the United States,
Sure.
the gradient steepens to the point where the wind field expands. And so our mesonet is able to capture most of that along the coastline where we see that expansion happen. Now, does it come with a few casualties? Sure. Some of our stations get beat up. They get thrown in the water. They get destroyed. We have, our crews come back whenever it's safe enough to come and reinstall those. But we usually get the same ones that go down. We try to find either another home or put them back on their home stronger than they were before. So some of those nav aids, like maybe some of the Coast Guard nav aids, sometimes it takes a little longer because we have to wait for the ATON crews to go out and make those fixes. But for some of the other spots like piers and things like that, it could be longer. We lost a pier in Myrtle Beach during Matthew, and so that one has not come back because the town's still deciding whether or not. I think they've started building that pier, but I'm not entirely sure. So some of these things, some of the stations go away temporarily forever, or maybe altogether forever. But we usually try to get something else nearby.
Well, I saw where Myrtle Beach, I saw you talk about this on Facebook, that they approved a $41 million surf thing in an amphitheater. So, okay. Story for another day.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I might have to go check that out. I'm kind of a surfer myself, so I think that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, put the pier back too while you're at it. That's all I ask, because we want that weather data, and people need to go fishing, right?
Yeah.
So surfers really like the WeatherFlow data, and surfers are very much in tune. It goes without saying, to what's happening with the weather. I have never surfed, not even for a minute in my entire life. I've enjoyed snow skiing back when I was younger, out west and even in the Appalachians here back east, but never surfing. I do love the ocean. I see the surfers out there. And we know that the surfers get really excited, and they do, and that's the appropriate term here. We try not to get too excited about hurricanes because they do have a very negative impact. But boy, the surfers get really fired up when there's a hurricane usually passing between Bermuda and the Carolinas. So that being said, there is a difference with a hurricane passing by and one that's coming in, and the WeatherFlow network can actually help with that, can't it?
It can to some extent. A lot of those, when we talk about NDBC, so the National Data Buoy Center, those are the ones that measure the swell heights, right? So our stations will tell which direction the wind is going to be coming from in a forecast or where it is near real time. So surfers usually do not like onshore winds, and onshore winds are simply from land to sea.
Right.
I'm sorry, sea to land or onshore winds. Offshore winds are from land to sea. So the surfers like the offshore winds because that's considered the cleanup swell.
Gotcha.
That's when a lot of surfers would rather go out unless it's too windy because then the waves get blown out. But that glasses things off. When you have onshore flow, it makes the waves very choppy. So our wind forecasts come into play here, and even Mark Willis from Surfline, he really likes the data that we have as well. He's back at the National Weather Service Wilmington office, but he's an avid fan of ours as well, and he watches these apps for his own surfing capabilities. But yeah, surfers like to see offshore winds for the most part, and they try to gauge when the swell is going to be coming in. And a lot of times, you have to be in sort of what's called a wave window. Now, you can Google that. You may not find very much information, but it's known that if a storm is coming up from the southeast, then your swell heights are going to build from Georgia, South Carolina, upwards to southeast North Carolina. That's your wave window. If the storm is too far in latitude at the South Carolina level, usually you won't get a lot of swell off of that. You'll get some back-end swell or some downstream swell, what we would call refractive, from northeast to southwest. Some of that swell direction. But as it's coming up from the south or southeast, that's usually when that swell is really pumping up the coastline and refracting all the way up through southeast North Carolina. Now, Outer Banks is known for getting waves from multiple directions, so they can get something that's at latitude with South Carolina. If the storm is already at the Bermuda latitude, chances are Florida, maybe central to South Florida, will get that back in swell, but the southeast region, for the most part, will not get it, except for maybe up through Cape Lookout and up through Outer Banks will get it pretty big in Virginia Beach. So it really is approximation of the storm in relation to where it is in latitude along the coastline as to what the swell heights are going to do. So surfers, they tune into us for the winds. We do have a couple of swell applications there, but Surfline's another one, and I'll speak to that because my friend Mark Willis at National Weather Service Wilmington, that's also another good one to check out for the swell heights, because we have worked with them before on a few projects, and they do a really good job. But either way, the data between a lot of these apps really does complement each other when it comes to hurricanes and tropical systems.
It does, and everything is related there. That the surfers are going to be looking for that information. They know that a hurricane is coming, even a tropical storm that's going to produce enough wind to generate those swells. And I just think that marriage of all that technology, all the different sources of it, and the surfers are also. It's interesting because they're also kind of this. Not necessarily first line of defense, but they're out there and they know, like if the surfers are getting excited about it, there's probably a tropical system out there. And if you don't know anything about it at all, you come down from Nebraska to the beach and you're like, man, there's a lot of surfers out here. And you ask them, hey, is there usually this many surfers here? No, there's a hurricane coming and we got all these swells. I've just always found it fascinating since I started my website in 1999, how many surfers were really interested in it, and it was more, and that's my point here, it was more than just for the obvious reasons that hurricanes make waves, surfers love waves. It's a lot more complicated than that, and I think it's incredible now the tools that they have to monitor this kind of stuff. So surfers have ridden some big waves over the years from various big hurricanes, and the WeatherFlow network has recorded some impressive data over the years. I want to just kind of go back in time. Just off the top of your head, can you cite the highest wind speed that one of your instruments has ever recorded in a hurricane? And if not, then let's at least talk about maybe something like Maria. Maybe it was Maria. And then we're going to talk about some of the ones that I was in, coincidental and very close proximity to your instrumentation, Arthur and Dorian. So first, peak wind gust ever from a tropical cyclone on a WeatherFlow instrument. Do you have that, what was it, if you don't mind me asking?
I may have to take a minute to dig through the Maria file, but I remember Maria really blew up just south of St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands.
Right.
We had a reading, I believe it was 147 miles an hour.
That's
been the peak wind gust, and I'll have to dig that up to see if I can display it here, maybe in between questions. But
sure.
I have to. You would catch me off guard on that one. I should have had that one ready. I was too busy looking at Florence and Harvey and a couple of other hurricanes, and so I missed that peak wind gust. But not too long ago, we had one in Myrtle Beach, and we had a really interesting situation. We rarely catch waterspout and tornadic activity on our sensors because they are along the coastline. So usually your tornadic activity is limited to inland in most of the cases, unless you get a waterspout or a tornadic waterspout. But let's see, I'll share a screen on this one. Now, we got a 114 mile an hour wind that occurred within a very small amount of time, like within about 10 seconds. And so I did this blog here, and it was upgraded. This tornado was upgraded to EF4.
Yeah, I remember that.
Hampton County this was April the 13th when this happened. We had a tornado.
Oh yeah, a month ago.
In South Carolina.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly a month ago. So this track started actually just on the other side of the South Carolina-Georgia border, and this very cell was intermittently touching the ground all the way to Myrtle Beach, South Myrtle at Myrtle's Inlet. And so I sort of did a quadrangle, around the track of it, and then estimated around 157 miles. But if you follow this system, very impressive tornado, and it went all the way across. I'll just let this play out a little bit. And the end result is what was really interesting, because it actually strengthened once it got up towards the Surfside Beach or Huntington Beach, actually. Mm-hmm. And this is what we got. So I did a little bit of digging through Level 2 radar archives, and then sort of repopulated this image. It's not the best saturated image that you can get on place files, but it does work to show that there was a surface touchdown of a tornado event near Myrtle's Inlet. It was definitely called for. There was debris signature from the Weather Service, and we saw this spike. And this is 5-minute data we're talking about here. So you see how thin that line is. I mean, this happened very quickly, up to 114 miles an hour. And so the 3-second gust mark shows that it happened within just seconds. So you can see how quickly a severe event can go from, I wouldn't say zero, because winds were up near about 20 knots at the time. And so, it went from 20 to 114. So if you're caught outside in something like that, this is a good piece of information for the Weather Service offices to relay an official information, because this is how dangerous things can get in severe events. And if you're outside and you're caught in something like this, it could be deadly. So that's our data. Another way that our data is actually helping the public by showing these severe events. But I'll poke around some of these files here a little bit during the remainder of our show to see if I can't come back to you on the other one with Hurricane Maria.
But Maria, unbelievable. I remember seeing that and reading about it in real time on Twitter as that was happening down in Puerto Rico. I got to remember to turn my notifications off. People are texting my iPad. Hopefully it'll stop, or it's going to be a rough final 10 minutes. The data was just mind-boggling to me, and I remember thinking as a weather geek how absolutely awesome it was that, WeatherFlow's got instrumentation down there. I didn't know, and it was just spectacular, because of something that historic, and you guys captured it. And I was like, man, hats off to them for however that got implemented, whenever it was put in. And I get jealous, because I would love to have 1,000 weather stations out there if I could snap my fingers during a hurricane and really capture that wind field. So Maria was a great example. Arthur in 2014, which, by the way, we will use that name again probably later this weekend. That name was not retired off the list. 2014 was the last time we used Arthur. I was in Hurricane Arthur along the North Carolina Outer Banks, and I remember being able to read on Twitter and elsewhere, and in the Hurricane Center updates, about your wind sensors that were in the Pamlico Sound. And I thought, gosh, again, how awesome is that you actually have instrumentation in the Pamlico Sound? What are those mounted on exactly, and what were some of the readings from Arthur, if I'm not catching you too off guard for that data? I mean, how do you mount these in the Sound?
Yeah, you're looking at one of these stations here, and this was the Fort Macon, actually. I think we talked last night. It was Oak Island. It wasn't Oak Island. It was Fort Macon. It was up near Cape Lookout. Right. And so you see the profile that it caught, right? You see, if you take this profile that reads out on a graph, it's 2-dimensional, and you almost think of it 3-dimensionally. Yeah. It's like maybe a hurricane looking like a donut, right? Right. And you look at the stadium effect of the inner eye wall, all the way down to the surface where it's very light winds. I mean, it got all the way down to about 18, 19 miles per hour. That's remarkable. Inside the eye wall, and then jacks back up to 80, 90 miles an hour. Some of the readings just to the east were a little higher, so Arthur was a little stronger than this, but you can see the actual profile of the core of the storm caught in this. This is like, it's not, I wouldn't say rare to catch, but we don't get these very often, this kind of profile look. And it's pretty interesting. But if you wanted to see maybe what it would look like for that one, and it's Fort Macon. So this is one of our HurNet stations right here. Love it. That's what it looks like. That's what caught it. So it's 10 meter. It overlooks the ocean, so you can see we have the metadata which shows low-lying land features, so there's
Mm-hmm.
no blocking mechanical features, so it's pretty wide open.
Yep.
And that's what it looks like from a distance. So that's what one of our premium HurrNet stations would look like. And it really is good to capture that information. And we can even get into Pimlico Sound. We have them on nav aids, so the various nav aids, you can see these from shore. If you're kiteboarding or sailing or anything out there, you can see these weather stations. And if you see something that looks like that, chances are it's one of ours. But the NDBC and NOAA also have some of these Seaman stations out there as well.
Right.
It just all really helps for all the data. So that's kind of how we capture. We just try to position these things in as many areas as possible, and using the National Mesonet program to sort of gauge our Mesonet on to help with all of the efforts ongoing.
Yeah, and so for Dorian, I understand you have a station at Cape Hatteras School. Is it high school? It's right there in Buxton. Is that right?
Let's see.
I thought I read that.
We have a Buxton.
Yeah.
We do have a Hatteras High. We have one that I think this one has 2 stations on it. One that's higher up
Mm-hmm.
for a higher reading, and then one at a lower reading at about 34 feet. So yes, that's true.
Yeah, because I was right. That's the one of the few times that I've actually sort of broken my rule. I left Rodanthe. I'd been on Dorian for 10 days. I'm like, I'm not going to miss the eye. And it was 90 miles an hour. I was like, I made the call, and I left Rodanthe, and I drove down to Buxton, and I got in the eye, and then the backside came, and that backside was way more powerful than the front side. And I remember, I think it was in one of the advisors from the Hurricane Center reading about a wind gust to X miles per hour was recently reported from a WeatherFlow station at Hatteras High School or something like that in Buxton. I don't know if it was that specific, but I remember thinking, yup, I saw that with my eyes, and it was just great since I couldn't haul a bunch of equipment down there. I didn't have it. I'm telling you, man, it's just really, for me, being out in the field to know that these stations are all around, I love it. And I think the public should really take stock in this, that it's going to help, especially as you all add more. And we're going to bring more equipment ourselves, but, we're never going to have 500. Certainly not at 500 mobile stations. I'd need some Warren Buffett money to kind of do that, and that ain't happening anytime soon. So it's great that you guys have these out there, and I think as a weather geek, maybe I get more excited about it than the average person. But when you see that wind speed advertised, you see it on television. You see it in tweets. Oh, the wind for Hurricane so-and-so is up to 120 now. It's a Category 3 or whatever. Being able to measure that is way more important than people think. And I know how excited I get about it. And I hope that other people will as well. So the future, as we wrap up here in the next few minutes, what will WeatherFlow be doing in the future? And it's as simple as perhaps, we're going to have more weather stations in more places, but I bet that it probably goes more in depth than just that.
Well, I think for right now, that is our goal. We have our new smart weather stations that started a couple years ago on an Indiegogo plan, and then now we've worked our way into Tempest weather stations. So we've gotten into home personal weather stations and solutions for the home. Eventually, we've talked about doing commercial grade, but for right now, we're sticking with home. We're trying to get the product that we have, as best as possible. It's machine learning. I'll splash that up on the screen here in a minute. But I think it's important, Mark, to also understand other things that our Mesonet does outside of just capturing tropical systems. It actually helps a lot of studies. I helped a College of Charleston student last year with his final, and basically he did a presentation based on sea breezes, right? So we know sea breezes occur along the coast. A lot of times these stations pick up the sea breezes before any of the inland sensors catch it. So we're actually able to see something that's invisible in real time as it comes to shore. And it helps with studies and focus studies on sea breezing, even sea breeze circulations versus oscillations. Maybe one air mass does something different than another air mass. So there's so many applications for this data outside of just tropical systems. It goes, it even drops in pressure, tides, all these things are sort of interconnected. So having a coastal Mesonet is immensely helpful for coastal studies in general. And so NOAA benefits from that in their coastal services as well. So, our partnerships go pretty deep with them and all the different studies that they do where they use our data. But getting back to I'll go ahead and put the Tempest up here and talk a little bit. I'm not the expert on this, but I do, steer people in this direction from time to time. If you want a home weather station, a lot of times what you've seen is, weather stations that have multiple parts. They have a rain bucket, they have an anemometer, a vane. And so when they break, most homeowners and people that own, they don't know how to fix.
Right.
And so what we've done is we've come up with a new solution for this, and it's called the Tempest. Now, this weather station is an all-in-one unit now. We used to have two different stations. We had an air and a sky, and together you would get the readings on those. But now we've done it all in-house, and these little panels around it are solar panels. So it actually carries a load and uses very low voltage to go a long period of time. I think this one even has, you can put a couple of batteries in it just in case the load dies off from lack of sunlight. But you can, this has no moving parts. So the top of it is very sensitive to rain, and we get rain readings off this. It's called haptic rain sensing.
Wow.
And it's not exact yet. If say bugs land on it, it may register, hey, it's raining, but it's not really, it won't register any amount, but it may trigger that. It also has lightning detection. This hourglass looking thing in the middle is actually sonic wind detection. So this has been tested in wind tunnels multiple times, where you get wind readings through that little hourglass configuration. The barometric pressure, you can see the beehive underneath, so it gets the barometric pressure. These also will provide heat indices. It'll provide a lot of wet bulb temperature and many other readings as well. So it's sort of an all-in-one, and this is for the smart home weather system efforts here. And you can just connect with your phone via Bluetooth. As long as you have a Wi-Fi, you can stick it in the ground out back, or you can mount it to your roof. It connects to your router, and then you just access it from your phone anywhere you want. You don't have to be near the house to access it from your phone. You can see what your weather is doing at home, or if it's raining, it'll send you a notification that it's raining, or if there's lightning nearby.
Wow.
So it's very practical. Yeah, we started putting this out into our apps and products as well. So QCing these, there's lots of them all over the place. And, I mean, they're all over the world at this point. So we've got a few in China. We've got them in the Middle East, Egypt, you name it. These things are starting to spread, and our testing team has done a lot of work on them. So they're not, like I said, they're not, they're in the process of being vetted right now. They're in basically, I wouldn't say a beta mode, but they're in the test field being tested by many. There's a large forum that goes on where folks say, hey, I found an anomaly here. Mm-hmm. We do some troubleshooting. We get that information out, and then once it's comfortable for everybody, it goes out to the market on retail. So we're looking forward to these. This is another area we've really delved into. But outside of the Tempest, I would say that we really just want to add more to the Mesonet and become better partners with NOAA. We continue those efforts. There's always a need for weather stations for one sport or another out there, so we continue those efforts, and that's pretty much where most of our focus has been on either development of apps or this Tempest weather station.
And so for the general public, how can they access WeatherFlow data? And you have an app, a web portal. There's some free stuff, and you have more subscription-based stuff. So just real quick, talk about that. I didn't know of WeatherFlow until several years ago. And the more I know, the more fascinated I've become with it, and I'm totally impressed by how dense the network is. So that being said, how can people tap into it?
Sure. So, once again, I'll share screen. Here's our brands. It's all here on the website. These are very specific, niche-specific for certain folks out there that are on the water. We have iKitesurf for the kite surfers. We have iWindsurf for the windsurfers. Sure. We also have SailFlow, which is very popular in the sailing community, shipping, harbor pilots, branch harbor pilots, whatever you name. Then Wind Alert. We also have Fish Weather. And then Datascope is our professional one that we provide to businesses and our partners. So those are basically the six right there. These five are the main consumer apps that we really talk about. But here's an example of one which is called SailFlow. Now this has all the data that you need. It even has the Weather Service readings in there, their advisories, anything that comes up. But it really is just one of these things. It's a free download. You can get it on the desktop application for free or on your phone. And then there is a membership involved with this. So a pro membership would be something that you could look at to get all of our data. Like everything in a nutshell would be the pro one, but we do have a plus service. We have different tiers of subscription that folks can access this data. We have to keep our lights on and everything. So
Oh yeah.
a lot of these stations provide, in data-rich environments, it's key information for most folks to access, even the Great Lakes. So this is one of them called SailFlow, and they all look about the same on the UI.
Right.
So the user interface, definitely, they're all pretty much the same now. If you get into iKitesurf, you get a little bit more niche specific on maybe there'll be like iKitesurf classifieds or some other materials that are just made for kiteboarding, like videos and things like that. So, but they all pretty much, they carry the same data.
Sure. Anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to throw in before we let you go?
I think we covered it, Mark, unless you have any other questions. I mean, just wanted to say, we always look at the tropics. We have a team that watches the tropics, and certain things are activated during that time. We all kind of step to it. That's where you'll see me on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at WeatherFlow Chas, that's CHS. Also on Facebook as Shea Gibson Meteorologist, and then also I run a local wind report here in the Charleston area called the Chucktown Wind Report.
Yeah,
so those
I
are
like
places
that.
You can find me to follow. And I think outside of that, I think we've covered the bases. Just wanted to let people know where you could find me to follow.
So folks that are interested in meteorology, you don't end up either at the Weather Service or on television. There are private companies, and like WeatherFlow is an example. This is Shea Gibson, meteorologist. He's not Shea Gibson, just the guy that likes weather. This is what a meteorologist can do. He does like the weather, but he went into it and he's got a career out of it here. So just keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen out there that are interested in meteorology. There are a lot of fields to go into, not just television, not just working for the Weather Service or the National Hurricane Center. There's a lot more to it than that. But I tell you again, I'll reemphasize, for me, being the hurricane guy that I am, the WeatherFlow data is so important, and just realizing again the vastness of the network, and that it's pretty much anywhere I'm going to be. It's just remarkable to be able to look that up. And so when you all on the other end there see in a National Hurricane Center report, and specifically talking about hurricanes here, yes, WeatherFlow is mentioned even in, like Shea mentioned, in local storm reports, those LSRs. But the National Hurricane Center, we ever see a WeatherFlow station recorded X, Y, and Z, this is one of the faces behind how all of that is possible. And I think that's the main thing I wanted you all to take away from this, is that this is out there. It's an immense network. It's in place. Tap into it when you can, if you can. If it's subscription-based, it's worth it if you're in the position to do that. But even if you just see it referenced, I think it's awesome. And like I said, this is one of the people behind it, Shea Gibson down in Charleston, Chucktown. I love that. Where does the name Chucktown come from? That's a great nickname.
I think it's just slang, to be honest with you. I'm not even sure. I don't think anybody really is sure where that came from.
I like it. It's catchy.
I think it's slang for the name Charles, right?
Oh, yeah,
so people
right.
always say
So
Chuck
why not?
for Charles, and
right.
So yeah.
Chucktown. How about that? All right. Well, I appreciate your time today. I'm gonna let you go. I know you got to get somewhere right at the top of the hour. Let's see how well I did. Oh, 2 minutes late, so I'm gonna shut up. Shea, thanks for joining us. I'm gonna sign off separately. Thanks for participating today, and we'll certainly be in touch, sir. Good luck.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me on. Everybody take care.
You bet. Shea Gibson, everybody. Thanks again, buddy. All right. Sorry about the audio being funky. There we go. Got the right logo there amongst the pictures that my 5-year-old takes. You never know what she's going to take pictures of. You got to be careful. Anyhow, that's the way it is this day and age. You never know what you're going to get. The last episode, or broadcast, episode sounds like it's a television series, but the last broadcast coming up next week, we're going to talk about the perspective of emergency management when we're dealing with hurricanes, and we're going to have a friend of mine on that has experience with that. He's now up in Chatham County. Look forward to that next Wednesday, probably in the normal time slot of 4 p.m. Eastern. We have to adjust the times depending on people's schedules and so forth and so on. So you never know, but that 2 to 4 time frame is when we're looking to do that. And then, like I said, we're going to take a break because hurricane season is going to start up shortly thereafter. We have Memorial Day first, And then that last week of May, I am going to be going out with some of my crew members to the Great Plains, and we're going to be testing some equipment. No, we're not going out there to tornado chase. It's using the alley out there, Tornado Alley, to do some testing. We have lots of cameras this year. It's a great opportunity to test stuff. And we're also going to test the weather balloon, the hurricane research balloon, Herbie. We have to do our annual test of that. And the Great Plains is a really great area to do that. It makes it a lot easier to recover it. So we're going to start that around Memorial Day for that last week of May. I will talk more about that on future hurricane outlook and discussion videos, which actually I have to do one of those today because the tropics are very, very busy. When people are watching this 5 years from now trying to read up on what's happening in the world of hurricanes and they see this Hurricane U series, you know, they're going to be like, oh yeah, 2020 was really busy. I mean, we got this typhoon that's going to be threatening the Philippines, the potential for something to develop off the southeast United States, and a very potentially dangerous cyclone in the Bay of Bengal that, you know, historically that area, we've seen a lot of people killed by tropical cyclones. It just goes to show you, it's that time of year. Hurricanes, tropical cyclones, typhoons, they're all the same thing. It just depends on what basin they're in. The time is nearing that we have to deal with them, and I want to make sure you're armed with as much information as I can give you so that we are better prepared going forward. All right? Again, big thanks go out to all the patrons on Patreon. If you are interested in becoming a patron, there's much more to it. It's not a membership or a subscription necessarily. It's not like, hey, I got a subscription to Sports Illustrated and I'm waiting for my next issue. It's a lot more interactive. It's like almost like investors or a co-op. And if you know Patreon and what it's done for other creators, music, hey, there's Grey's Anatomy. We'll turn that off real quick. Come on. There we go. The default setting once the iPad stops talking to the Apple TV. Patreon's done a lot for music and animation and film and all kinds of other things. I'm using it in the world of hurricanes and weather, and it really is a remarkable platform that's allowing me, through the use of crowdfunding, to do some amazing things. So again, thank you to all the patrons who are making this possible, whether it's $1 a month to our $100 a month supporters. They're the ones that make this possible, and I appreciate that very much. All right? I also appreciate you tuning in. That's what makes this even more enjoyable, is the fact that you're there watching from the other side. All right, I'm going to finish up so I can go produce my hurricane outlook and discussion because things are busy like I alluded to. Again, next week we're going to talk emergency management, and then we will get ready for the hurricane season ahead. All right? I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com as always. Thank you so much for tuning in to Hurricane U. I'll see you again next week live, and I'll see you in a little while after I produce today's video discussion. Have a good rest of your Wednesday. I'll talk to you